recording. Okay, so we're going to be doing a little bit of shoulder girdle work tonight, and I wanted to review a few of the muscles for this area. So I'm going to share the screen here for a second, and just a moment, find it. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can see that. All right, so this is a posterior view, and on this side over here, you're seeing the scapula. That's the spine of the scapula right there. So you're really looking at the deep muscles here, the rotator cuff muscles. That one's supraspinatus, living in that top little groove there, that supraspinous fossa. Underneath the spine of the scapula is infraspinatus. These are both wrapping around and going to the greater tubercle of the humerus out here. These are muscles that make up the rotator cuff. This one right down here is called teres minor. It runs along kind of the same line as infraspinatus, wraps around forward here, also to the greater, I said trochanter and I meant tubercle. And then down here we have teres minor, and it's hard to see in this picture, but it's actually going to go through the armpit and wrap around to the front. This is a strong medial rotator, along with latissimus dorsi over here, this really large muscle. We'll probably do just a little bit of lat work tonight as well, because it's such a strong influencer on medial rotation or internal rotation, which most people tend to favor, have more internal rotation. So there's the deep layer. Now we're looking at the muscles that go from the scapula to the neck, and you can see levator scapula here, goes up to the transverse processes of L1 to 3. And then next to that, you can see a little bit of the spleni muscles, splenius capitis and cervicis. They run from the spinous processes here down the middle. Capitis is going to go up and attach to the head here, and cervicis is going to come underneath and attach to the transverse processes in the cervical, the upper 2-3 cervical transverse processes. And then below that, you see these big strappy muscles here that are running at a diagonal. These are the muscles that are the rhomboids. They're the ones that pull our shoulder blades back and towards the midline. So when you think about doing a shoulder shrug, you're engaging these muscles. And when our shoulders are pulled forward from poor posture or sitting and working on our computer for too long, they're also getting over lengthened. So we'll be addressing these more with a little bit of just compression, and then we'll do some shortening for them because they tend to be lengthened in general already. And then you see this superficial muscle here, this really big one. This is trapezius. Trapezius is going to attach to our scapula. That spine right there is part of its insertion, along with, you can see the top of the scapula here. That's the acromion of the scapula. And you can actually see just a little tiny peekaboo window here of the lateral portion of the clavicle. This muscle actually wraps around to the front. So when we look at someone's shoulders, that angle that we see, that line that we see there, is actually trapezius that's making that up. So that's trapezius there. It comes up, it attaches to the head along these spinous processes in the cervical and down to the last thoracic vertebra. It's a strong muscle for elevation. So when we have raised shoulders, a high shoulder, we know to look at trapezius as well as levator scapula, as well as rhomboids as muscles that can be contributing to that shoulder being higher. And then on this side, we can see the deltoid. So deltoid is also a superficial muscle. It's sitting here kind of surrounding the shoulder, and you've got fibers here in the back that are running from the spine of the scapula going on to the deltoid tuberosity. You've got fibers running here, and then what we can't see in this image are the anterior fibers, but it surrounds the top of the shoulder here, and it's a strong abductor. So we'll take a few minutes to address this muscle as well. I'm going to swing us around here to a lateral view, and in this picture, you can kind of see the muscles that here are attaching. This is infraspinatus here and teres minor, and there's teres major and lats. And these are the ones that I was saying go underneath the arm. They actually go through the armpit and wrap around to the front. So when we do some lateral work on the scapula, we're really going to be working along these muscles right here as we do this lateral work. We're going to do some sideline work tonight because it's a really important area to release. These muscles oftentimes are overlooked. And then we'll look at one more view, which will be an anterior view. I can pull it up here. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so here's our anterior view. So what we haven't seen from those other two views is pectoralis major. And pectoralis major attaches to, this is the clavicle or collarbone here, and then the medial half of it, this portion of it right here, along with the whole length of the sternum, going all the way down to the very bottom of the sternum, is the origin of our pectoralis major. This muscle comes across, and you can see it kind of goes underneath the anterior fibers. That's deltoid there, that we didn't see those anterior fibers in that other view. And it's going to insert onto, now here's an image of the humerus on this side. It's going to insert along a line here that runs along the greater tubercle. It's called the crest of the greater tubercle. So it's going to insert right about here. And those muscles that we're wrapping around from the back, the rotator cuff muscles, those are all attaching here in this region to the greater tubercle, and then a little one of them we didn't look at is the one that's on the inside anterior of the scapula, and that's subscapularis. That one goes to here. We'll actually, I may just take a moment to look at subscapularis because we will talk about that muscle. We're not going to go into it very directly, but I do want to just bring it up because as we mobilize the scapula, which we'll do from a side lying position mostly, we get into this muscle a little bit. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, so in this picture, we're not seeing it. There we go. All right. So, no, it's not in that one either. Goodness, where are you? Sorry, I'm trying to find a picture of subscapularis. There it is. Okay. So in this picture, just so you know, you're looking at the front of the scapula here. The ribs have been cut away in this image. So the ribs would be in front of this. So the way your scapula sits on your back, the front of the scapula, the portion of the scapula that's actually up against the rib cage, okay? So this is against the back of your rib cage. This bone is covered by muscle. You see it here in this picture, and this muscle is an internal rotator. I was mentioning that lats and teres major are internal rotators. This muscle is as well, and this muscle sits right up against the rib cage, and there's another muscle that's not in this picture that's called serratus anterior. Those two muscles actually glide across one another. And so when we're working to mobilize the scapula, we're working to kind of mobilize like the space between this muscle and serratus anterior that it has to ride against. And so I can see if I can get a picture of serratus real quick. Sorry, this is a process because I can't, the little pictures are so small I can barely see them. There we go. Okay, so there's serratus anterior. This is from a kind of lateral anterior view, and it originates from the rib cage, and it's a little hard to tell in this image, but it runs underneath the scapula. They're trying to show you x-ray vision there. So you're actually looking at it running underneath the scapula, and the humerus would be sitting right here in this picture. So that's the portion of it that's superficial right there, but the muscle sits kind of underneath pec major here, and it's going to be underneath lats on the back of the body. Okay. So I think we've had a few people join. If there's anybody that has any questions about this, please feel free to unmute yourself if you want to. Okay, I'm gonna come back to this. Make you all big again. Numbers there. Oh, I see stuff share. There we go. Okay. So, all right. So we're going to start massaging. I don't know if everybody who, I guess, just never joined. Do we have anybody else? Nope. Okay. Welcome, Nevra. All right. So we're going to sit at the head of the table to start. Actually, I'm going to move this pillow. All right, and what I'm going to have you do is just do a little test. We're going to decide which shoulder we want to focus on. So if you can sit up towards the head of the table. And then what we're going to do is just this little push down on the shoulders. And what you're checking and assessing for here is to see which shoulder moves down into depression and kind of rebounds back up towards you with more ease. So just notice which shoulder is stiffer in that movement. You're pushing down and letting the shoulder kind of come back up. And I cheated a little bit because I tested this out beforehand, so I knew which side to put my camera on. So I'm going to be working on the right shoulder here, but you may be working on a different shoulder based on what you're finding there. So pick which side feels tighter to you, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to go sit on that side, which now that I tell you that, if that doesn't work out for your camera, then do the other side and then do the side that needs it more afterwards. Because obviously you need to be able to see what I'm doing. So as I double think that one. All right. So what I'm going to be doing right now is I'm going to be sliding my hand underneath the scapula. And I want you just to think about curling your fingers just enough that you can reach up and find the medial border of the scapula. Okay. So one hand is reaching underneath. Your hand is kind of flat, but then your fingers come up right against that medial border of the scapula, okay? Now with the other hand, come and find the sternum. So you can use the side of your hand or some fingers here, and basically just find the side of the sternum, and then maybe even if you want to, kind of work your finger into the spaces right next to the sternum and right in between the ribs, okay? So you have a little bit of contact with the ribs. Maybe you kind of feel the tension there of pectoralis major. If that's relaxed, then maybe you're getting a little bit of intercostals. We're going to have our partner take a few deep breaths. And as they take deep breaths, the focus is really to take a big, full exhale. You don't have to do too much with your hands. You're just letting your hands follow their motion. Couple more deep breaths. We're letting this shoulder blade maybe settle into our hand. The ribs may adjust themselves just a little bit as this is happening. Okay, great. So now they can relax their breathing. I'm going to make a bigger palm out of my hand here, and I'm just going to relax my hand on the top front of the shoulder. And here we're just going to hold for a couple minutes. And if the person on the table is not relaxed, you can have them take a few more deep breaths, but if they're pretty relaxed, then they literally can just chill out here while you're holding. Again, we're just giving this shoulder girdle some information that it can soften and relax into your hands. And sometimes speaking that to a person helps them, but if the person's pretty relaxed already, then their body will just do it automatically. It'll just pay attention to your hands being there. So leaving the top hand where it is, slowly slide your other hand out from underneath that scapula. And just for the fun of it, we're going to go back up to the head of the table. And when you push down to do this test, don't push down in a way that like causes alarm to their body, but do it kind of slowly and gently. But just test to see if that little bit that we just did made any difference. Now for me, when I do this retest here, I can automatically notice with a little bit more clarity where the tension is, and that for the person that I'm working on here, this tension is coming from the neck, okay? So I'm actually gonna do a little real time here and like address what I'm finding. So what I'm gonna have you do next is notice which side of their neck maybe feels a little tighter. You can do that with some palpation. If it's not obvious from the push down with the shoulders, maybe kind of just check out using your fingers here, check out which side of the neck seems a little tighter. These are the muscles that are attaching from the scapula to the neck. So we've got trapezius at the superficial layer, and then underneath there we can get some levator scapula. I'm gonna reach my hand underneath the neck and just with my fingers kind of engage. So I'm sliding through and underneath. And then with my fingers, I'm just gonna engage these muscles a little bit. So I'm kind of just using this sliding motion with my fingers over the muscles on that side of the neck. And as I do that, I'm gonna just gently do a little push down on the shoulder. So it's a push down and a release. You're not holding that shoulder down the whole time. So do it as a pulsing kind of motion. So it's like, think about sculpting across the muscles with your fingers while you're giving the shoulder a little push down. Okay, good. Now, because I'm picking up some neck tension here, I'm gonna go ahead and do a little cradle for the neck. And this is really a great way to kind of get everything in this area to soften. So I'm gonna have my fingers like this. I'm gonna come right underneath base of the neck here. So you see where the neck muscles are coming into the head. And I'm just gonna bend my fingers at about a 90-degree angle. So my fingers are bent like this. And I'm just gonna hold here. I'm not pushing up or forcing my way in. I'm just letting the weight of the head come down on my fingers. Our fingers make a great little platform here. Now, if you're doing this and you find that the person that you're working on isn't really relaxing into your hands, then you can always cue them to push their head back into your hands and then have them relax. Like you would say, push your hand back, and then have them do that for just a few seconds and say, now just relax your head. Your clients look pretty relaxed though. I think they're doing good. COVID massage, it's hard to find. These people are lucky. All right. So maybe just do a little circular friction on those neck muscles as you're moving your hands out from there. Give that neck a little bit more time. Check my chat here, somebody said something. Okay. Okay, so when you're ready, bring your hands up tops of the shoulders now. And I want you just to find the clavicles, and we're gonna just sort of explore. We're kind of walking our fingers along the clavicles, and we're just gonna notice for any areas on top of the clavicle or below the clavicle that feel particularly tight. So you can do that where you're kind of sandwiching the clavicle between your fingers as you kind of start from the center and move your hands out. And you might just notice that the clavicles sit differently on the body than one sticks out more, one is more in towards the body. So what you're doing is finding something that's interesting here, right? Like, oh, this is different here. I'm going to stop and work here for a moment. That may be consistent with the side with the tighter shoulder, but you never know. It could be consistent with the other side. So I'm finding some tightness on the left side, and the right shoulder is the shoulder I was focusing on. So I'm just going to hang out with that for a moment, letting my fingers just sink into the space. I'm working right below the clavicle here, and I'm just sinking into it. Now, if you're finding if someone's been working out and this pectoral muscles are particularly tight, then you might want to do a little bit of tendinous attachment work here, which one of the ways we can do that is we can work by making a little cross. So you go up and down and then across, and you address the tendons. And when you do that, you're doing it where you're holding tension as you're doing it. So it's like you're dragging the skin up, dragging the skin down, dragging it across, dragging it across. So, but make sure you get the tendon as you're doing that. So it's not, you know, incredibly superficial where you're just sliding across the skin. So I don't know if you can see my fingers. It's a tug down, a tug back up, and then a slide side to side. Now, if it's somebody's tender in this area, it's going to be less tender to go up and down than it is to go across. That cross fibering there usually is a little bit more sensitive for people. So you can check to see whether or not that's actually okay.
Is it okay to do both sides at the same time, or should...
Absolutely. Multitask. Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, just so you know, I'm just going to tell you what I'm finding is that I'm actually able to scoop underneath the clavicle a little bit. In kinesiology, we barely mention, I don't even know that we do mention subclavius. On the cadaver video, the host of the cadaver video always says subclavius, its movements or its purpose is unknown. But subclavius runs underneath the clavicle and actually attaches to the first rib. And I'm actually picking up some subclavius tension right now. So I'm kind of scooping in just even a little bit more. Is that tender in you? Okay. And just going into that little area of tension. So if you can scoop underneath the clavicle, then you're going to get into subclavius, and just check in with the person, because if it's tight, it can be really sensitive. And it may be an area that they haven't had work before. So sometimes that just in and of itself will make it tender. All right. And so before we leave this area, I'm going to just do some kind of sweeping strokes. Again, I'm grabbing the clavicles and I'm lengthening from the center out. Make sure as you're getting close to the throat that you're just careful that you're not like dipping into that little jugular notch. That's never a pleasant experience for someone. Okay, and while we're here, let's go ahead and just address the top of the sternum here. So I'm going to show this with my right hand so that you can see, because my left hand's kind of in the way of the camera, but you can do this with both hands or one hand. Depends on how much space you have to work here. Coming to the top of the sternum here, I'm just going to kind of slide my hand down. So it's a little bit of like a fascial drag. And because it's a fascial drag, it may not feel fabulous for someone. So ask how this feels. It may be a little bit of a pulling sensation. It may have a little bit of like, you know, a brightness to it. If someone's hairy in this area, then be careful of that too, that you're not just like tugging on their chest hairs, because that's not usually pleasant for them either. So just do a little check-in when you work in this area. If you're working with a client that's larger breasted, then you know you might just be on the very top of, and you might just lean in and not slide down, but just stop there, right? So it depends on the size of breast tissue as to how far down you can go, but it's still an area that's helpful to work regardless of the person's gender on the table. Okay. So we did a little bit of work here. And now, just to get the pectoral muscles just a little bit better, I'm going to stand for this, but we're going to do just a kind of a brief cross hand stretch. This is a fascial stretch. And again, I'm going to show it here first just with one hand so you can see what I'm doing because my other arm is going to be in the way. But as you do that cross hand stretch, your hands start close to the sternum and then you're moving them out away from the sternum. Okay? So starting towards the center and then moving away. Yeah, and you know, you can kind of lean your body back a little bit just to make sure that you're not, you know, resting your body on their head. This doesn't work for everybody. It depends on the size of the therapist as to whether it works. But again, the idea here is to grab and pull, and the longer you can kind of hang out with it and hold that tension, the better. So you're finding the barrier of the fascia and then you're just waiting for it to melt a little bit. And if they have really, you know, kind of pliable fascia, you may slide a little quicker. Or if you put lotion on your hands, then you may slide. I don't have any lotion on my hands, so I'm kind of sticking here, which is what I want to do. But if you have lotion, that's okay. You'll still get a nice just gliding stroke across, and that's fine. That's still good. We'll take it. Again, be careful of their throat as you come across. Things to be mindful of. Okay, perfect. So before we move on, I'm going to do another little just shoulder walk here and see. There's a little bit of improvement here. And honestly, this left shoulder that was the looser of the two is looser than it was before after I did that little bit of work on the left side. The right side's still a little bit sticky here, so there's more to do. We're going to move to a side lying position. Oh, are you sleeping? No. Not yet. Okay. Back towards me. Barely. Just reset your side. All right. Good. I'll let you all get your people comfortable. It can be helpful if you have a little bit of something under the head and neck, even if that's like a rolled towel, because otherwise the neck comes down to meet the table, and then that automatically puts trapezius and levator scapula into a stretch, which muscles in general do better when they're in kind of a neutral position to work on them as opposed to a stretch position. Yeah, you can use that face cradle. That's perfect. There we go. Good. All right. Okay. So what I'm going to be doing is lifting up this top arm and sliding my hand underneath. I'm grabbing the front of the shoulder here. Okay, so make sure that person's close enough to you, so they may have to back up on the table so that they're close to you. You don't want to have to reach forward. In fact, we come back towards you. Okay, great. Okay. All right. So we're here like this. The back hand is just resting on the actual scapula, and we're going to kind of start to mobilize here by moving the actual shoulder blades. So taking them down and forward, you can move them forward and back. Keep track with the hand that's on the scapula of how that scapula is gliding. So this is an assessment of the movement of the scapula. And if you kind of go slowly with it, you can sort of fine tune, like noticing like where the catching points are. So as I come down here, I notice the catching point. And when you do that, it may even clue you into which muscles are holding this scapula, keeping it from moving. Does the scapula move easier when it comes up? Does it move easier when it comes down? Does it move easier when it slides back or when it slides forward? So this can be a multitasking of us both mobilizing the scapula and getting a little bit of glide between subscap and serratus anterior, and also doing some assessment as we're there. Okay, so I'm noticing that levator scapula is holding on a little bit on this shoulder. So I'm going to take this left hand, have my hand just sort of parked here, but this left hand is going to come now, and I'm going to feel for the spine of the scapula on the back. I'm walking down the spine of the scapula, and then, and it depends how thick the person you're working on as to how easy it is to find the superior angle. But you know, the superior angle sits above the spine. So if this were the spine right here, I have to come from the spine and I have to go up a little bit on that medial border to try to find the superior angle. So with your fingers, see if you can get into the superior angle there. And I'm going to come just above the superior angle, and I'm going to feel for the tension of levator scapula. Now, it feels like a rope, right? So it's usually pretty easy to find on pretty much everyone. And in order to work levator scapula here a little bit, I'm going to give it a little bit of slack. So I'm going to take the scapula up. So I'm actually going to bring it into some elevation, because this muscle tends to be really hard to get it to just give it up. It doesn't just naturally like relax. And now what I'm doing is I'm using that back hand, I'm cross fibering across levator scapula, and right above the superior angle of the scapula. How's that pressure? Good. Now, depending on the client and their tolerance for this, you might go like, you know, quicker, a little bit more aggressively across that. If it's super ropey and that's just irritating to them, like, you know, feels like you're like flipping across cords, then go slower and be more thoughtful in that movement. All right. I'm going to see if that helped to relax the shoulder a little bit, and it did. Great. All right. So the next thing that I want to do is work a little bit on the lateral border of the scapula. Now, in order to do this, we need to get this arm out of the way. So it depends on the flexibility of the person. For some people, you're going to be able to just lay their arm across their head. For others, that may not be comfortable, so I'm going to show you other options. They could take their hand and place it like this, and they could hold their arm up like that. Okay, now if they have restricted range of motion in their shoulder, I may need to hold their arm as I work the lateral border here. So any of these things could be options. I'm going to go with this one because my client is flexible and it gives you good view of what I'm doing, but you should do whatever is comfortable for your client. And one thing that I'll tell you is that if these muscles are in a fully stretched position like this, they're going to be pretty tight. So actually to start, it's pretty helpful to have a little bit of give. So I'm actually going to park my client's hand. Notice how the hand's just here. It is going to be parked here to give me a chance to get into this lateral border for starters. Okay, I'm going to take a flat hand here, and I'm going to come into the lateral border in this way that I'm pushing into it and sort of sliding back. So imagine you're going from the lateral border and you're going towards the medial border by sliding your hand. My back hand is on the scapula to keep me from just pushing the whole person over. So I'm giving some resistance with the back hand on the scapula as I'm sliding across like this. Is that comfortable? Mm-hmm. Okay. This should feel pretty good to people. If it doesn't feel good, then you maybe need to adjust their arm for them to give, again, a little bit more slack. And again, you know, as you're doing this, coming in from the lateral border, you're behind the armpit here, so you're not grabbing the armpit hair, right? Like you're starting behind that. It's a good marker for you to know where you want to start on that lateral border, okay? All right, so now we got the lateral border just kind of fascially warmed up a little bit. I'm going to use my forearm here. And again, I'm continuing to hold this hand right on the back of the scapula to give a little counter pressure. And I'm just going to, with my forearm now, come up that lateral border. So you're starting here and you're moving up towards the arm staying on that lateral border. Once you get onto the humerus, you're actually going to encounter posterior deltoid, which wouldn't be a problem to keep going on that, other than you're going to start pushing their arm down. So I'm going to do a few strokes and come back each time, back down to where I was, and then come back up again. Again, you know, make sure that this is a comfortable stroke for them. You don't need to lean in much. You could be using your forearm and you could be brushing slightly, you know, just gently, and that's still good. So if somebody's tender in this area, if they've worked out recently and this is a tight area for them, then ease up. Okay, good. So we talked about lats a little bit. Lats is kind of this area right here, and it's the very, very lowest point. So when you're on that lateral border, if you can find the inferior angle and kind of feel that bit of muscle right here, that's latissimus dorsi. Now, depending on, you know, how tight this is, you may be able to kind of grab it a little bit like this and even work down the side of the body. It's held against the ribs here, so I'm doing this through close. I don't know if you can see, I'm kind of going like this and pulling my thumb towards my fingers. So imagine you're grabbing lats here. This is right against the ribs, so if somebody's ticklish, this may be too much for them. If they're ticklish, then I'd say start with broad hands and just use a broad hand compression on lats. That's a good starting and warm up. If this is tightly held against their ribs, then again, that grabbing may be too much. Because lats comes all the way down the body and goes to the posterior iliac crest here, I'm going to slide my hand down, engage the top of the hip. And you can even do that with your forearm. It depends how crafty you are. You could be here and you could engage this hand coming across lats like this. Or that could look like using the forearm on the top of the hip and then using the other arm and stretching the two arms away from each other. This one is sort of just anchored here, and this one is sliding. My client is thin, so I'm like, you know, feeling each rib. Is that okay for you? Mm-hmm. Okay. So adjust your pressure based on the depth of the muscle there. If that muscle's, you know, not very thick, then you're up against ribs. Don't be putting a lot of pressure if you're feeling a lot of rib there. Okay. I'm going to come back up to this lateral border, and now this area is pretty pliable. I don't know if you can see, but I can kind of pick this up with my hand now. And I'm actually grabbing like this. And now, if you wanted to, you could have your partner, the person you're working on, you could have them reach their hand towards the wall behind them. So go ahead and start to reach your hand. Just do it slowly, a little slower. Yep. It ends up being a little bit of like it's almost like a pin and stretch, but it's a pinch and stretch. I'm grasping this muscle. Is that intense for you? It's good? Okay. Again, this, you know, in somebody who's tight, maybe I just go from here to here. Maybe that's all I do. Maybe the grabbing isn't available yet. It has to be pliable enough to be able to grab. Okay. We'll bring that arm back down. We're going to come back to this same hold, hand on the front, and just do a little bit. Oh my goodness, that is so much better. You know, everyone wants to go for the medial border of the scapula, and I'm telling you, the lateral border is the magic. This shoulder blade is just so much more flexible. Wow. You can feel it, can't you? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to get you to go. So we're going to go back to face up. Mm-hmm. All right. So we're going to do one more little assessment here with our walking our hands, pushing down on the shoulders. I want you just to see if that made a difference. And I would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
How was it? Did it make a difference?
It's subtle, but yes.
Subtle, okay. And what about you, Teresa?
I could tell, really. I mean, he couldn't feel a lot, so
Okay.
he seemed to have quite a bit of mobility already.
Okay.
I did feel some tenseness in the right shoulder,
Yeah.
but more
Yeah.
the back of the scapula.
Okay. All right, great. So we're about at time. I wanted to wrap up, but I wanted to just see if you had any questions, if there was anything that wasn't clear you want me to show again.
Where were you grabbing when you were doing the pinch and stretch?
Yeah. So you know how like when you think about your armpit, you have like a wall here of muscles and then you have a wall here of muscles, right? Like you can grab on yourself and pinch those muscles. That's what we're pinching, is that back wall of the axillary fold.
Okay. So any of them, you weren't going for a specific muscle?
No, you know, you're kind of grabbing them as a group, and it's really about like what you can access. So depending on how tight someone is, you might only be able to get like a little bit of a grab, you know, like you just have to like, you know, this is a process of softening it until you're able to actually grab. I think probably why I got so much progress here is because she's pliable and I was able to grab a lot, you know? So if somebody's tight there, then you're not going to get that much, which means you just spend more time with that form. You spend more time doing fascial work. Like you just go slower to get to where you can get to actually being able to kind of grab that wad there. Any other questions, Teresa?
Thinking.
Okay.
No, I just liked how you talked about the lateral border of the scapula. We definitely have done a lot more work on the medial border.
Right.
So we've been working the back.
Yeah, it's just like one of those overlooked areas that people like just kind of brush over it. And I think that a lot can be gained from spending some considerable time there.
I do have one question about when we were working on the front pec major. How much pressure is okay to put on the sternum? I know it's going to vary from person to person probably, but about how much pressure do you do?
Well, as long as you're not getting into the jugular notch, if you're below that, you can put a considerable amount of pressure there. The pressure that I'm using though is down towards the feet as opposed to down into the body. Right. So I'm not actually putting a lot of pressure down. I'm more sliding. It's really a fascial pull. So again, it has that quality of kind of like, it's like you're tugging on the skin, you know? Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, that's a great area to work. Honestly, sometimes I'll take both hands and I'll just like push down with both hands on that area, you know, like, I mean, you can even do that with a considerable amount of lean in, depending on the person, and, you know, kind of open this area up, because this is a very tight area for a lot of people. So pushing down here can be really helpful. You know, when this is tight on someone, when all of this is tight, you're essentially like loosening this anterior neck sleeve. Like if you think of it as a sleeve of fascia, you're releasing that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, Kat. I mean, I'm seeing what you're doing there. That looks really good. Yeah. Okay. Well, it was good to see you both, and I hope that your partners enjoyed the massages. Some thumbs up there. Excellent, excellent. So feel free to continue massaging since you got your tables and everything set up. Yeah. We have some agreement there from your clients. I'm going to go ahead and end our recording here, and I'm going to do that first, and then